All right, let's see what we have here then.
Too low, terrain. Too low, terrain. 50, too low, terrain. 30, too low, terrain. Too low, terrain. 10.
Where are you from? Where did you learn flying? How the hell you become a fighter pilot? You are going like this all the time. Not acceptable. All the time I'm telling you, big number, you bloody hell. No, you're giving a damn rudder. Why?
So that was a lot of stuff that happened on that short video. It was only about 40 seconds, and there's a couple of things that I really want to emphasize here, guys. So the first thing that I want to just explain is the constant warnings that you could hear throughout the whole flying part of this video.
Too low,
So
terrain.
this seems to be a 737 Classic, and I fly the next generation, the 737-800 in my case. But I do think that they have the enhanced ground proximity warning system on the Classic as well. The GPWS, or the eGPWS, basically works on a big database that has all of the terrain all around the area that we're flying in the database. Then it superimposes the position of the aircraft, and it compares it to what the terrain is like. All right. So if we would descend below a certain level, and the GPWS knows that, okay, there's a mountain coming up, it's going to start giving us warnings. However, when we are shooting approaches, as in when we're coming in for landing, obviously we don't want to have terrain warnings because we know we're getting close to the ground. That's kind of the point. So there are, around every airport, there is basically like a cone where the eGPWS, provided that we are on exactly the path that we're supposed to be, will inhibit the warnings. It will still be there. You know, there will be warnings for too low gear, for example, or too low flaps, but it will not start telling us that we're getting close to terrain. It will not give us these warnings, basically. Now, in this case, they got these warnings, and that would tell me that they're probably flying into an airport which is not in the eGPWS terrain database. That tends to be old military airport, for example. And when we fly into places like that, I've only done that once, but we had a very rigorous procedure for doing exactly that. And that basically we needed to cross-check that our position was correct. And if we could verify that, yes, we are in the correct position, then and only then could we kind of inhibit the eGPWS system. Because the danger is that if you do not do that and you fly into this airport and you're sitting there nicely on your glide slope and you see your poppies and you start getting these warnings and you disregard the warnings, you can become complacent about the warning. So if you're used to hearing it all the time, maybe next time that you hear it when it's an actual hard warning, you will not react to it as fast as you should. And that's the reason why we tend to inhibit the warnings when we fly into places like this. However, this procedure is different between different airlines. Now let's talk about the fun stuff, all right? The kind of CRM, that, or the lack of it, that we saw in this video. So there's a couple of things here. This is obviously a training flight. So you have the instructor in the left-hand seat, and then you have the training first officer in the right-hand seat. It looks from what he's saying that the first officer used to be a military pilot. And that's important here because we are all suffering from bias. Okay, so if I'm an instructor and I fly with someone which I know have a lot of experience, and I know from previously has been very skilled, for example, then as an instructor, I could relax a little bit. And if that student then does something that I did not expect, that can give a startle factor. And that startle factor can actually exhibit itself in aggression, all right? So if this captain thought that he's sitting with a really skilled pilot, and this poor first officer has been coming from, flying fighter jets, he's now flying a big airliner, it's a completely different way of flying, he can still make these kind of basic mistakes, and it can catch the instructor a little bit off guard. So that is one possibility, okay? The other thing here that we have to, that I want to kind of emphasize is that as an instructor, in a situation like this, you basically have 3 different choices. Okay, either if you're the pilot monitoring and the first officer is the pilot flying, and you see that the approach is becoming unstabilized, okay, not safe, then you call go around. And the first officer can then execute the go around. Okay, that's number 1. The second thing you can do, and this is the most common thing we do, especially in the beginning of line training, is that you see that the first officer is becoming unstabilized, and the last 300 feet on approach is generally where people have problems. Okay, the closure rate of the runway might be different than what they're used to. Most young FOs that's just starting out is trying normally kind of shying away, as in lifting the nose a little bit, so you have to keep telling them to continue to descend. But anyway, if you see that they're starting to become unstabilized, you can take the controls. Okay, my controls, and then you can stabilize the approach and hopefully land. If you cannot stabilize the approach, well then you, as a captain, execute the go around. And the third thing that can happen, which is what we're always hoping for when we start an approach and the first officer is flying, is that even though it's not perfect, it's still safe. And you constantly kind of look, is this safe? Is he or she going to land where it's supposed to be? And if it's safe but not pretty, you still let them come in and you still let them land, which is what he actually did in this case, okay? Because you cannot take over all the time. You cannot expect a first officer to do perfect approaches and perfect landings. They need to learn from their mistakes. And as long as that's within the kind of realm of safety, well, that's what we do. And that's what he did on this approach. So whether or not it's stabilized or not, we can't see the instrumentation. It's impossible to judge from this. But what you can see that he's doing, though, is even during the flare, at about 100 feet and down, he's kind of doing this with his hand, okay? Now, that could be construed as what we call patter, okay? An instructor is allowed to patter his student. And that is basically coaching them. As they're flying, you coach them. So when I'm flying with the new first officer, for example, I might be constantly talking to them. All right. For example, what I was saying before, if I see that they're starting to pitch the nose up, then I tell them, okay, keep descending, take a little bit of thrust off, keep descending, there we go, start to flare, there we go. And it depends, you know, it depends on if I think that they need that coaching or not. And it's possible that that's what he was doing by basically showing that, okay, you're doing this now, try to not do that. Okay, I don't know, I mean, I haven't seen that. But the thing is, though, that especially during that phase of flight, as a captain and as a trainer, you need to be ready to take over. So you don't want to have your hand up here, you want to have it close to the thrust levels in case you have to take control. Then the aircraft lands and the first officer takes reverses, and you can also see, and this is also something that I noticed here, that the captain is kind of inputting a little bit on the controls. Okay, now generally speaking, when you are doing instructing, is you're either flying or you're not. Okay, so you either take over the controls or you don't, because if you're starting to do inputs without communicating it, the first officer might not understand that you are making inputs, and you get a very strange kind of dynamic going down. So you either take controls or you let them control, or you tell them what to do. The only time really where I would input would be during the takeoff. If the first officer is over rotating, then what we tend to do is you tend to keep your kind of thumb up like this, so that when the rotation comes and you feel like it's going a little bit too fast, then you can kind of hold against a little bit in order for them to feel what the correct rate should be and to safeguard the aircraft. But otherwise, you either take over or you don't. But the funny thing here is that as this first officer, the poor first officer, is taking the reverses, the kind of bollocking starts. All right, he starts screaming at him and, who are you? Where are you from? What are you doing? You're doing and going like this. What the hell? I mean, there is a place for a debrief, right? And the thing with doing a proper debriefing, what you're trying to get is you're trying to get the first officer to not only understand what he did wrong, but in what way that went wrong. So, you know, you can drill down into the core of why something happened, so that he or she can learn from it and do it better next time. That's the whole point of a debrief. Now, a debrief should not happen during a sterile phase of flight. You know, this aircraft was probably at 120 knots decelerating when he started to scream at him. That is not the time. There's still plenty of things that can go wrong at that point. So that's why you need to concentrate on getting the aircraft down to safe taxi speed, taxi the aircraft off, park it, shut it down, do the checklist, and then you can do a debriefing, right? In my case, I tend to do maybe a quick overview. If you're taxiing in, for example, I'll be taxiing, you can say something, okay? Just think about that approach. Think about how we got a little bit high, just to highlight to the first officer that, okay, I need to remember that. So there's something that's going to be debriefed. And then when you have a long quiet while, so in the cruise on the next sector, for example, or in the in the crew room or walking off the flight when everything is done, then you take the time to do a proper debriefing where you can get their full attention, okay? Not just after landing.
When you're not flying, how the hell you become a fighter pilot? You are going like this all the time. Not acceptable.
When it comes to aggression on the flight deck, there's a couple of things I want to mention here. So first of all, in my view, there is no room for aggression ever on the flight deck, under any circumstance. Okay? I know that you can, in the heat of a moment, flare up, you can become angry, but you need to cool yourself down. Aggression will never be an effective tool in a modern flight deck, ever. But now I also know that there are some differences in culture here. So there are culture differences. So while this type of behavior from a training captain in some airlines would be so unacceptable that it's likely that they will lose their training role, or at least it would be reevaluated with some extra training, emphasis on CRM. In other cultures, in other airlines, in other parts of the world, this might be seen as the norm. This might be the way that it has always been done. That tends to be airlines that are heavily dependent on ex-military pilots, or have a more authoritarian kind of way of dealing with things. But I'm going to be, this is obviously my opinion here. Just because something has always been done in a certain way doesn't mean that it's good, right? If you go back into history, we used to take mercury pills because of their fantastic health benefits. But then we realized that that wasn't a great idea, so we stopped it. And that's kind of what I think that we should be doing when it comes to this kind of aggressive teaching. And why do I say that? Well, I say that because you never get anything good out of it, okay? In an absolute best case scenario, you come across a student that might realize that your intention as an instructor is good, that you didn't mean all of those bad things that you said about them, and you might kind of try to get something out of it, all right? But most likely, getting your ear full about how stupid and bad and poor you are about what you're doing is still not going to be constructive, all right? It would be better if they, after the screaming, then sat down and said, the reason that you started snaking on the approach is because you're using rudders. All right, we're not supposed to use rudders during the approach on the 737. We have the yaw damper to do that. Okay, you might have done that on your previous aircraft. We don't do it here. That's a proper way. Now you've drilled down to this is what caused it. Don't do that. Let's try it differently next time. In a worst case scenario, what will happen is that you will scare the living daylight out of the poor first officer, and the first officer will not hear anything you tell him or her after you started screaming. They will just shut down, they will close down, they will not listen, they will be afraid of you, and the only thing that they will try to do for the remainder of the day or the next time they fly with you is try to avoid getting into that situation, all right? They will keep themselves in the corner, they will try to avoid doing anything that will upset the dragon in the left-hand seat, and they will just not learn anything from it. In fact, what might happen is that after a day of you screaming at them, or it really only takes that one time that you scream at them like this. Maybe you make a mistake. Maybe I am sitting there as an instructor and I'm flying and I missed something, I forget something, or there's something that I misunderstand. How likely do you think it is that the first officer that you've scared is going to speak up to you and tell you, Petter, you've missed doing this now, maybe we should do this? Not very likely. No, it's more likely that they are just going to know, I don't want to, I'm not sure if that's right or wrong, I'm just going to be quiet. And you might miss something, right? Something really crucially important might be missed because you have broken down the CRM and because you have increased the power distance in the cockpit from being like this, where everyone knows who's the boss, but even the one who's not the boss feels that they can speak up, to something like this, where the one that's down here doesn't feel that they can speak up under any circumstance. And when you are here, then the CRM has broken down. You don't get 1 + 1 is more than 2, which is what you're trying to get from an effective cockpit. Instead, you get 1.5 pilot at best. So this is why I keep doing these kind of reaction videos on stuff like this. I've done a previous video about 2 years back where I was really upset about a similar situation. Now, I did not think that this was as bad, but it's clearly not an effective way of doing things. And even though I think that this is a cultural thing, and I do understand that there are cultural differences, I still wanted to make this video to kind of explain why I think that this is something that needs to be taken really seriously, okay? We want an open, positive and constructive environment in our cockpits in order for our students to learn as much as possible. Okay guys, that's what I had when it comes to the reaction to this video. If you have more questions about this, which I hope you do, then go into the comments below and write everything you think about it. Write what's positive, negative, if I'm right or wrong and why. And if you want to talk to me directly, or you want to just discuss with other aviation enthusiasts out there, well then either you download my free Mentour Aviation app, which there's a link to in the description here, or you join my Discord server, which is obviously also free and with a link down here. I hope that you enjoy this kind of content. There's going to be much more of it coming up. So if you find something on the internet, maybe there's a clip out there that you find interesting, funny, or you don't understand, well then let me know about it, right? Contact me in Discord or on the app, for example, or via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you want to really reach me. Let me know about it, and maybe that will end up as a new video.
Not acceptable!
Have an absolutely fantastic day wherever you are, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
How the hell you become a fighter pilot?